Well, first of all, thank you, brother and pastor and Dr. Kantardzis for this invitation. And it is a refreshing experience for me as a pastor to revisit some of the topics of the themes and the research that I'm very much interested in. And I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to hear my colleagues on this topic. My topic is it's not who is my neighbor, it's who is my neighbor. And I refer here to Richard Niebuhr. To Richard Niebuhr and to his classic work, Christ and Culture. So the intention of this paper is to explore the ways in which between Christ and a nation, Christ and a nationalism in a very introductory form, and to find those connections not for the Balkans, but when it comes to the North Macedonian evangelical Protestant Christians. So I thought that maybe a more focused approach would help me and to finish my homework and then to see what maybe there is for the rest of the Balkan countries. As you would know, let me say a few words. The paper isn't taking into consideration at least two works, which I would like to take into consideration later, and that is the Ernst Trollsch's the social institutions of the early church, to which this book, Christ and Culture, is basically a summary, as Niebuhr says in his preface. And also, I just would love to take into encounter at a later stage of D.A. Carson's Christ and Culture Revisited, and to see how Christ and Culture, seen by D.A. Carson, would help me in a better understanding, because Niebuhr, of course, is an author that existed decades ago, and some of his findings and his resources might be outdated. It was already said that one of the basic elements of the culture, of the Mediterranean cultures, ancient and present, are the notions of honor and shame. And I think this is a very important, these segments are very important to be acknowledged as such, and to be understood in terms of the different ways in which Christ, and in this case, the nation as a part of the culture, are building the interrelation. Niebuhr speaks about his first category, and his first category is Christ against culture. And he points out that this is the major topic and identity definition of the Johannine community, as well as the early monastic. And I put an emphasis on early monastic communities that were reactionary in their worldview, and also pretty much against the culture and the polis as it was established in the pre-Constantinian, and then more and more so in the Constantinian era. So Christ against the nation, when it comes to North Macedonia, was developed especially amongst the early evangelical Protestants. Today, they are the evangelical Methodists of North Macedonia, and their beginnings were in the 19th century. In the 19th century, as within the context of the new regulations, where promotion of the gospel and in these evangelical Protestant churches and cultures were allowed within the Ottoman Empire. So what basically happened was that this group has the beware you little flock mentality, mostly subcultural mentality, because once they were able to position themselves within a new faith context, within the new churches, they understood that they cannot anymore relate in the same ways when it comes to their compatriots. So it was, first of all, they were small back then, and we're still small, and in terms of the demographics and the percentages. They were also children of pietistic missionaries, and the first approach to the gospel culturalization, the evangelical Protestant culturalization, was to basically point out that there are at least two segments which need to be addressed if somebody would like to be a biblical Christian or a New Testament Christian, as they would refer to themselves. First, that was the attitude, the very negative or even anti-Orthodox attitude, which was very present in the early days and in some forms even today, because the Eastern Orthodox were basically seen as non-Christians. Why was that the case? Because the Orthodox, at least the folk Orthodox, their neighbors and compatriots, were biblically illiterate. The structure of the church was very much politicized and away from the New Testament and from the Gospels as they were read by these newly formed communities, and because of those two things, those early evangelical Protestant communities were really wanting to offer a strong critique of the orthodoxy, as well as an invitation to a new way, which was seen as a biblical way. And this is very important to understand. There is still distinction between the biblical and New Testament Christianity as a concept and the Orthodox Christianity, which is still under the same criticisms. And it is like that because even today, if you go to an Orthodox church, and back then with those early pietistic missionaries, what they were able to experience is a church which has long liturgies, 2, 3, 4 hours, in a language that nobody speaks anymore, which is the Old Slavonic. And according to the evangelical Protestant standards of those times, that was waste of time in the best scenario, or superstition that needs to be fight vigorously. The priesthood, because of the political connections and lack of biblical knowledge and lack of missional awareness, were also under attack. So we have documents, but also we have this tradition that is very critical of the Orthodox priests and the structure, because again they were seen as basically non-Christians that were invited to become Christians and to enter the true and real New Testament or biblical churches. So within this kind of a setting where this group of people were a minority, there is this strong anti-Orthodox sentiment, and at that point, a departure from the traditional, I would say, Caesaro-papistic, and I'm going to refer to that later, Caesaro-papistic major attitude, which means that the state and the church are one and the same, and that of course, I'm preaching to the choir, but the state is protecting the rights of the church and the interests of the church, and then the church is doing the same for the church. So for the first time in our history, there was this group of, I would guess, a few thousand people who thought differently, and who because of that, were able to withdraw from this major self-identification. What also happened with this group, and this is just one part of my research, and taking one village in southeastern North Macedonia, the village described before the coming of the missionaries as the most musical and most capable in singing and dancing. This was their feature. Is today one of the traditional evangelical Protestant villages, known by the several factors identified as such by the wider populations. Those are the people that basically do not dance at weddings, do not sing at weddings. They sing at funerals, which is which is a big problem, as you would imagine, especially when there is an Orthodox funeral and a Protestant funeral. Because the Protestant come singing and the Orthodox come crying and mourning. So we are always, that is a practical pastoral challenge that we are facing. First, I'm checking, is there an Orthodox funeral? And why? Because their perspective is that these heartless Protestants are celebrating death of a loved one, or maybe this was a hated person whose death they basically celebrate. So, and also, not to put it in good or bad, but zero alcohol tolerance. My wife is actually coming from a six generations of evangelical Protestant. This was kind of like a completely new world for me. Because my father-in-law, even when it comes to alcohol, if he had a bottle of alcohol, he would write it that this is an alcohol for medical purposes, which means that don't touch it unless you're close to death. It's in the fridge, and you need to be aware that this is. So I took the pen and for medical drunkenness, and then I just added drunkenness and drinking. So my goodness, my son-in-law is probably not a Christian. So, very strong mentality, but interestingly enough, within the wider context of the Balkans, as strong as this anti-sentiment of this group was, they have maintained very friendly and warm relationships with the Christians in Bulgaria, in Serbia, in Greece as well. At the point of the Orthodox Church is always disagreeing and being promoters of certain politics, this minority group, this marginal group was able to maintain relationships, not only relationships, what I know is that especially the evangelical Protestants from Serbia, from Croatia would come to North Macedonia. They would go to those countries. With Bulgaria also relationships when it comes to mission and evangelism. So this is this might sound normal to us. It never happens when it comes to the Orthodox Church. So this is this first Christ against the culture mentality. So for them, what does it mean to be against the culture? It basically means that you need to redefine the nation in order to, according to the biblical principles. At least in theory, I would say, because browsing through the sermons, browsing through the materials that we are left with, and my wife's grandfather was one of the preachers, neither the sermons or the materials nor the actual sermons preached by these preachers had touched on nation or nationalism. It wasn't the issue in the West when these missionaries came into North Macedonia, and it wasn't an issue. It was an issue that, for that reason, was not to be discussed at all. So this is, I think, important, especially when it comes to something that I think we need to clarify as such, which is that for a number of decades, the evangelical Protestants at least in North Macedonia, were only on the recipients' ends when it comes to the themes and topics and issues that we would like to discuss. This is why I also appreciate bringing this topic instead of, let's say, some theological topics that were never part of our context. Recently, that was, when it comes to North Macedonia, the big dragon of the new atheism. And for a number of years, I kept hearing about this, the dangerous and Hitchens and Dawkins and whatever, and kind of until I realized that this is not at all an issue in North Macedonia. This is really, it has no repercussions in our indigenous context. Our questions are different. So I think this conference is also one of those turning points to start from here and then to invite input from everybody else when it comes to addressing specific and relevant topics. You see, neighbour has another category apart from Christ and Christ against culture. He has the category of Christ of culture. And again, this is a tricky one, because when he says Christ of culture, he of course thinks of the American culture and the tendencies of the American culture of his times. It has nothing to do with the Balkan features. It has nothing to do when it comes to the major Caesaro-papistic model that we are experiencing. So when I would like to explore more and further Christ of the nation, this is for me this is immediately the major Orthodox Caesaro-papistic constitution, at least in the case of North Macedonia. I'm not referring this to Albania. Just so my brothers there over there, but this is for North Macedonia. This is the main thing in which the state and the major religion are basically one and the same since the Byzantine times, and this is still the understanding. So if I go back into the North Macedonian politics in the last 30 years, it was always the government and the church. Almost identical statements, almost. There was even, I haven't seen any critique by the church towards the government. The government was also very careful with the Orthodox Church, because that is their ally. That is where they draw their support. So it is within that context. It is the theological rationale, the theological existence. One of the major points of this Caesaro-papistic model is to support mythologies and dreams of greater states and golden ages. That is pretty much what our several archbishops would do, always supporting that this is really what need to leaving an impression that is Christianity, and that Christianity and the God of the Christians is very much and specifically ethnically concerned. So that is why in North Macedonia, at least, there is even a communication gap when it comes to the invitations for our Albanian fellows to become Christians, because of the Caesaro-papistic and ethnocentric model. For them to become Christians means to become Macedonians. So that is just not an option. We are not even going beyond that. When it comes to the evangelical Protestants, I think that this attitude is especially evident amongst the people that are first generation, or maybe second, but especially first generation converts from Orthodoxy into evangelical Protestant churches. So this is still the Caesaro-papistic type, which now kind of adds Bible reading, adds personal devotion, but is really not able to. It's not able to make any sense of the relationship between Christ or Christianity and nation apart from the Caesaro-papistic model, and that is why, and also even until now, because in former Yugoslavia and in what used to be Social Republic of Macedonia, the Protestants were seen as foreign propaganda, and I'm not talking about any how can I put it, like popular view, but this was 5 years ago. We had yet another book, yet another PhD thesis by the history department of the University of St. Cyr and Methodius, the foreign religious propagandas in North Macedonia. Catholic propaganda, Protestant propaganda, which has the mentality of the Orthodox, that there is always somebody that is trying to do damage to the right Christians, but also some socialist background in terms of the West is trying to infiltrate and destroy us through religious structures. So this was a thesis, and I couldn't believe it. I would almost cross myself that like five years ago somebody would go into the academic world under this kind of topic, and they're mentioning the pastors of the evangelical Protestants and propaganda, and how is this so dangerous for for the project of North Macedonia. So this is again, this is still present, and I would say it hasn't been addressed in the churches, in the evangelical Protestant churches in North Macedonia. I guess it is easier to encourage people to more prayer or to more Bible or whatever that is, even to theological topics that are really not of our interest, but introducing something like this, which is, I think, and I agree with you, which is of a fundamental importance. When we read the earliest church history and the church history, it is of a fundamental importance for the people of God. Within the evangelical Protestant churches and within the wider population, of course, but what Niebuhr characterizes and defines as Christ above nation, and he has the early Gnostics on his mind, those who had this knowledge, this insight into something which is greater than their context. And he mentions the liberal Protestants in the United States. I think, at least in my primary observations, we have a different group of Christ above nation in North Macedonia, in the evangelical Protestant churches of North, and in the wider society. And those are not Gnostics in terms of more dedicated, more theological, more whatever. Those are the evangelical Western Amero-Macedonians, I would call them, who Amero-Macedonians, they're Americans, but they're so in the 90s, I was very much surprised, to be honest with you, when I entered the first houses of Western missionaries to see a different way of life. That is, for example, when I first saw the patriarch washing dishes, and which was for me unheard of. And my grandfather would never touch any dishes. My father would never touch any dishes. And here is this big U.S. missionary who is like honey at the end of the lunch.
The end of the gold day.
That was exactly the end. I'm sorry that I haven't remembered the exact date to just celebrate. But this was a completely different lifestyle and different way of communication, different way, which because of the, I would say, theological superiority, and just in so many ways the cultural superiority in so many segments was seen as the life. So if you would like to become a Christian, you need to start, I guess, washing dishes once you get married, and you need to have nice wallpapers and the dishes that just nobody had, at least in North Macedonia in the early 90s. So because of that, because of this American myth, we have especially youngsters who are above nation, who honestly live in the body in North Macedonia. Their spirit and their ambitions are connected with the Western world. They would like to migrate to Western Europe. They would like to migrate to the United States. They even, their language, their first language is actually English. And they're conceptualizing in ways that are simply not present in the normal North Macedonian context. So this is something that if the peril of the Christ of the nation is obvious, and it is nationalism, and it is not being able to build bridges with the rest of the body of Christ in the Balkans, this is something different. There is this new generation that is basically not interested into the kingdom of God in North Macedonia. And that is why we have, and we're doing a research, I'm teaching at the only institution at the moment in North Macedonia, the Evangelical Theological Institute. We have less and less interest within the younger generation of pursuing vocational pastoral ministry. Why? Because simply they do not see themselves as part of physical context. And they're not only, within this group, they're not only critical of history or of politics in the last 200 years or however many years. They basically show no interest in any kind of identity beyond this Western, and in this case, Western evangelical Protestant identity. So they are the Gnostics because of the evangelical Protestant churches, they were able to get a glimpse of a world which exists outside North Macedonia, which is an appealing world, and they would like to. They are pronouncing the state in North Macedonia and in the Balkans, or to use the euphemistic Southeastern Europe, as beyond any hope. Their solution to that is migration, and it is becoming a very serious challenge when it comes to discipleship, when it comes to even preparing the next generation to take over roles and functions within the evangelical Protestant churches of North Macedonia. What I would like to finish with is that this basic thinking and basic categories made me think a little bit deeper, and I'm already setting the next stage of this research. I would like to continue by reading Paul on his and national identity in general with Balkan exegetical eyes. This is what I would like to, because I think that, at least in my role as a pastor, I would like to see Paul shedding light, biblical light on this very important dynamics when it comes to North Macedonia and the Balkans, but to read him in Balkan exegetical eyes. What I have discovered while studying theology now, a long time ago at Regent College in Vancouver, is that me and several others from Southeastern Europe, we brought a perspective that is basically non-existent when it comes to, let's say, to the study of the book of Galatians. What was obvious since my first reading of the book of Galatians, this is a Mediterranean guy who is super angry with his friends, and no rhetoric can put it into a proper place. And I have read Betts and all of that, and that this is a Roman rhetoric. I think that Galatians is one of those letters written in just one breath. Angry Mediterranean person who is confusing topics. He sounded like, Paul sounds in Galatians to me almost as my mother or father when they're angry with me, and they're like, they pick up from the things from the past and the present and threats when it comes to the future. So I would like to read Paul on national identity, because he's coming from a culture which is strong in the national identity, but he's also, as we know, the apostle to the Gentiles. So what are the tensions, and what was, to use Tim Keller's words, what was he able to affirm when it comes to his national identity, and what he needed to reject in order to fulfill, as Gordon Fee says, God's purpose of creating a people of God for his name and glory. And also, once I will do this part of the homework, I would like to continue and conduct a research within North Macedonia amongst the evangelical Protestants. In this case, the number is really an advantage. It can be done. So to then use the neighbors categories and to see how are people mapping themselves within the larger spectrum of the North Macedonian evangelical Protestants, and to see how are we positioning ourselves when it comes to Paul and his view on nation and nationalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you.